I and some others have said before, if a game series has great music, it deserves to have a music or rhythm game to celebrate said music. While some Nintendo Switch owners are a little salty that the Kingdom Hearts game the Switch is getting isn't the HD collections, similar to how Dragon Ball fans were mad that Xenoverse 2 came out on the Switch before Fighters did, the Kingdom Hearts series is finally back on handhelds, and if you're a fan of the series' music, you might want to look into this one. Here is my review of Kingdom Hearts Melody of Memory for the Nintendo Switch. The story of this game is really the story of the entire franchise. For the majority of the campaign, you get little cutscenes where Kairi is summarizing and recounting events of pretty much every game of the series. Starting from the very beginning, we get summaries of Kingdom Hearts 1, Chain of Memories, 358 over 2 days, 2, Birth by Sleep, Recoded, Dream Drop Distance, 3, you get the idea. And although the new stuff we get I can't really go into detail on because of spoilers, we do get about 30 minutes of new cutscenes that sets up the next chapter of the series. So when I first found out this game was going to recount pretty much the entire series, the first thing I thought was using this as a way to catch people up before playing Kingdom Hearts 3. You know the people I'm talking about. The gamers that played Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 and wanted to dive straight into 3 without getting all of the required knowledge and context from the non-numbered games. If you wanted to use this game for that purpose, you probably could, but to be perfectly honest, I think each game needed more cutscenes, and some of Kairi's descriptions felt a little too condensed for newcomers to the series. When it comes to gameplay, this is a music or rhythm game with RPG and combat elements thrown into the mix. But before we get there, let's talk about spoilers. I have some thoughts and criticisms on certain parts of the game that are very spoilery in context. In order to keep the main review as spoiler-free as possible, I will be adding a section at the very end of the video after my normal outro image to talk about those spoilers. I will also make mention when I get to those parts of the game in the main review so you know what is in that spoiler section. Now getting back into it, as a music game, Melody of Memory sports a huge track list. We've got 140 different songs from pretty much all games in the franchise, including some more secret area level tracks like Fate of the Unknown from Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix. As we dive into the game, we've got two little areas of game modes. As far as single player content is concerned, we've got World Tour, or the game's story mode, and track selection, essentially letting you play any song you've unlocked in the story mode or even making playlists to enjoy them to your heart's content. And then we've got multiplayer. You can go into versus battle to play against another player, be it local or online. And close to the bottom of the screen, there's even a little co-op mode where you can play songs together. You've also got Museum that allows you to look at unlocked art, listen to the tracks, and see records. But most of your time in the game is going to be spent with World Tour and multiplayer. Speaking of World Tour, let's talk about how the story campaign works. When you first start World Tour, you're in a gummy ship on a collection of worlds representing most of the games of the series. You may not see the mobile games here, but even Recoded got a world with a couple tracks dedicated to it. Your task is to go into each world and complete songs. You can fulfill optional missions and objectives to get stars, which will open up gates to the next worlds. You keep repeating this until you get to the stages with story scenes attached to them, eventually not only going from world to world, but game to game. Now, when you're trying to complete all of these songs, you have 3 different types of stages you go through: walking stages, diving, and boss. Walking stages have your team running down a musical score, fighting off enemies and dodging attacks to the beats of the music. The way they have this set up makes this kind of feel more like an action game and not a music game. You have to maintain HP during stages, only losing it when you miss one of your hits. You've also got a lot of enemy types to worry about, as well as jumping to glide in the air for music notes or just to dodge incoming attacks. Tying this with the ability crystals allowing your character to use special combos and magic spells, it really is a colorful and flashy system. Dive and boss stages are a little different. Dive stages have a really big cinematic collection of cutscenes going on in the background, and instead of fighting enemies on the track, you just have notes flying at you like in a typical rhythm game. Then we've got the boss stages, which are kind of a mix of the two. You have notes flying at you like in the dive stages, but it shows your characters in the background fighting off a boss character. These boss fights also add little segments where the boss fights off your character with a big flashy cinematic attack, and how well your team guards and dodges against those attacks is dependent on your accuracy in the section before. These systems really make for a fun experience, and like I said earlier, there were many times I felt I was playing an action game rather than a rhythm game. But there are some downsides to this. I wouldn't really call it an aspect I don't like, but something I was a little disappointed in. We'll go into more detail in the spoiler section at the end of the video, but the boss quantity and variety I felt was pretty lacking. With that being said, let's now dive into content and length. As far as hours are concerned, you won't be spending as long in this game as you would a Kingdom Hearts RPG, but it took me about 10 to 11 hours to complete the base game and get to the ending, and then another 5 to 6 hours to grind out enough missions to unlock the secret boss area. Now let's talk about presentation. As far as the visuals go, they look similar in design to the HD collection versions of the games represented. Going from one game to the next changes all of the environments, models, and enemies that appear, and they look very similar to the way they did in the HD collections. While a lot of the movies used for the cutscenes and dive animations definitely look like they were ripped straight out of the original games, it is overall a very pleasing looking game. Enhanced even further by the buttery smooth frame rate whether you're going through single player or multiplayer. I have nothing else to say about performance, so now let's dive into battery life. On the original model, Melody of Memory has a battery range of 2 hours and 21 minutes up to 2 hours and 34 minutes. On the Nintendo Switch Lite, it has a range of 3 hours and 2 minutes up to 4 hours and 2 minutes. And on the Redboxer V2 2019 model, it has a range of 3 hours and 56 minutes up to 5 hours and 2 minutes. In conclusion, Melody of Memory is a much larger game than I was expecting, sporting 140 great tracks from the Kingdom Hearts series for rhythm game fans. Now on the downside, some of the stage choices were a bit of a letdown, particularly with boss fights, and some others I can't say due to spoilers. But still, if you're a fan of Kingdom Hearts and its music, this is a great rhythm game that at times doesn't even feel like a rhythm game. Reviews to go rates Kingdom Hearts Melody of Memory for the Nintendo Switch an 8.5 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned if you're wanting in on the spoiler discussion. Speaking of, this is your last warning if you don't want to be spoiled about other parts of the game. I will not be going into the story of Melody of Memory, but some contextual things with the gameplay does have spoilers, so if you don't want to be spoiled, get out now. Alright, I think I've given you enough time, so let's dive into the spoilery discussions for the gameplay. This is mostly going to be about the boss fights. Melody of Memory has 4 boss fights. The first 2 are the final bosses from Kingdom Hearts and Kingdom Hearts 2, Ansem Seeker of Darkness in his human form on Destiny Islands, and Xemnas in his little zebra pajama form from Kingdom Hearts 2. So after this happened, I figured all of the games would have their final boss as a boss stage, but I was wrong. We did not get any bosses from Chain of Memories, 358 Over 2 Days, Dream Drop Distance, or even Kingdom Hearts 3. Birth by Sleep got a boss fight, which I loved because it's my favorite game of the series, but the choice they made is so strange. We didn't get boss tracks for any of the Keyblade Graveyard fights at the end of the game, none of the final bosses. We got a boss fight for Maleficent in her human form when Ventus fights her in his story. And even if they specifically wanted Maleficent to be a boss, why not use her dragon form boss fight from Aqua's story instead? It really just didn't make sense, along with the fact that there were only 4 bosses across the entire game and not even Kingdom Hearts 3 got its own boss. This also connects to the other thing I was disappointed with. When you get about 3/4 of the way through the game and unlock the Kingdom Hearts 3 section, you get this little slot of worlds that is locked behind a 280 star gate. I was only at about 200, 210 by the time I beat the game and got the ending, so I had to do a lot of grinding to unlock this secret area. As you might expect, this is where all of the game's secret boss battles are. Namely Sephiroth from Kingdom Hearts 1, along with Lingering Will and Roxas from Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix. All of the songs from these fights are amazing, and I love the fact that they brought them into the game, especially since we haven't had a Sephiroth fight since Kingdom Hearts 2. The problem is, none of these are boss stages. They are all walking stages. Sephiroth, Lingering Will, and Roxas in boss form never show up in the game. To be perfectly honest, it felt like all of that grinding was kind of wasted since we don't actually get to see them. Now, the disappointment here doesn't really ruin the game for me. I still absolutely love it, and I've been having a ton of fun both with the single player and multiplayer. It really just felt like a huge waste to only have those 4 boss fights and even have the secret bosses as not really bosses. Not to mention that it really feels like Kingdom Hearts 3 got shafted in this game. Almost every game has a ton of different songs and each world has multiple things there. Every world of Kingdom Hearts 3 was a single dive track where you just see cutscenes from that world and that is it. It took less than half the time it took for pretty much any of the other mainline games to get through the KH3 section. And at first I thought, oh okay, the renders are just like they are in their original games, so they probably did this with Kingdom Hearts 3 because some of the systems this game was coming to couldn't handle those graphics. And then you get to Melody of Memory's final boss, and that no longer applies. But really, that's most of the stuff that disappointed me, and I think I was disappointed mostly because of how big of a fan of the franchise I am. I still think it's a great game, and I really appreciate it to anybody who made it this far into the video. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.